The snow came down in sheets that January afternoon in 1885, and Olivia Ramsey knew she should have turned back hours ago. But the thought of her sister lying sick in that cabin, 5 miles north of Muskogee, kept her pushing forward through the blinding white. She pulled her wool coat tighter around her body and urged her mare onward, though the poor animal stumbled with nearly every step through the deepening drifts. The temperature had dropped so fast that morning that frost formed on the inside of the general store windows before she left town, and Old Man Patterson had warned her that a storm was coming down from Kansas that would bury the whole territory. She had ignored him, thinking only of Margaret and the medicine wrapped carefully in her saddlebag. The path along the ridge was usually clear enough even in winter, but today Olivia could barely see 3 feet ahead. Her fingers ached inside her gloves, and her face felt numb despite the scarf wrapped around it. She had made this journey dozens of times since Margaret married that farmer and moved out to his homestead, but never in conditions like these. The wind howled through the bare trees, shaking loose clumps of snow that fell like small avalanches. Her mare whinnied nervously, ears flattened against her head, when the ground beneath them gave way. It happened so fast that Olivia barely had time to scream. One moment they were on solid earth, and the next the entire shelf of snow was sliding, tumbling, roaring down the mountainside in a terrifying cascade of white. She felt herself thrown from the saddle, saw the mare's dark shape disappear into the churning mass, and then everything went dark as the weight of the snow crushed down on top of her. She tried to move, tried to breathe, but there was nothing but cold and pressure and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. In that suffocating darkness, Olivia thought of all the things she would never do. She was only 23 years old, and she had never been in love, not really. There had been boys who courted her back in Tennessee before her family moved west, and there was Daniel Morrison who worked at the bank in Muskogee, who always tipped his hat and smiled when she passed. But she had never felt that wild, desperate feeling the novels described. She had always been too practical, too focused on helping her father run the mercantile after their mother died. And now she would die here, alone in the snow, and no one would even know where to look for her until it was far too late. She tried to move her arms, but they were pinned. She tried to kick her legs, but the snow was packed too tight. A pocket of air near her face gave her just enough oxygen to stay conscious, but she could feel it getting smaller, the carbon dioxide building up with each breath. Her chest ached with the effort of pulling air into her lungs. The cold was seeping through her clothes, through her skin, into her bones. She wanted to cry, but even that seemed like too much effort. Time passed in strange, disconnected fragments. She might have lost consciousness for a while. She might have dreamed. But then she heard something that pulled her back, a sound that did not belong to the silent world of snow and death. It was rhythmic, scraping, getting closer. At first she thought it was her imagination, her dying brain conjuring false hope. But the sound continued, grew louder, and with it came a voice. "Hold on. If anyone can hear me, hold on." It was a man's voice, rough and urgent, and Olivia tried to call back, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. She tried again, putting every ounce of strength she had left into it. "Here. I am here." The scraping intensified. She could hear him grunting with effort, could hear him talking to himself, words of encouragement and prayer mixed together. Come on, there has to be someone. I saw you go down, I saw you, just hold on." Olivia closed her eyes and focused on breathing, on staying conscious, on being ready when he reached her. Each breath was harder than the last. The air pocket was definitely getting smaller. She started to feel dizzy, disconnected from her body. But that voice kept calling to her, kept telling her to hold on, And so she did. When the first light broke through the darkness, it was so bright that it hurt her eyes. Cold air rushed in, fresh and sharp, and she gasped at it like a drowning person breaking the surface of water. Strong hands grasped her shoulders, her arms, pulling her up through the snow. "I have got you. I have got you." She emerged into the blinding white world like a creature being born. The hands that held her were bleeding, she noticed dimly, raw and torn from digging through packed snow and ice. The man who owned them had a face weathered by sun and wind, dark hair plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the freezing temperature, and eyes that were the most intense shade of blue she had ever seen. He was looking at her like she was the most precious thing in the world, like he had just pulled a miracle out of the earth. "Can you breathe? Are you hurt?" His voice shook slightly as he brushed snow from her face with those ruined hands. Olivia tried to answer, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She realized she was shaking violently, her whole body convulsing with cold. The man stripped off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her, then pulled her against his chest. "We need to get you warm. My horse is just over that rise." "Can you walk?" She tried to stand, but her legs would not hold her. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms and started walking. She wanted to protest, to tell him she was too heavy, that his hands must hurt terribly, but the words would not come. Instead, she found herself pressing closer to the warmth of his body, her face against the wool of his shirt. He smelled like leather and wood smoke and something else, something clean and masculine that made her feel safe even though she knew nothing about him. His horse was a big buckskin gelding, patient and steady, as his master somehow managed to get them both into the saddle. He sat behind her, his arms around her waist holding the reins, keeping her upright when her body wanted to slump. She could feel his heart beating against her back, fast and strong. "There is a line shack about a mile west. We will be there soon. You are going to be all right." He said it like a promise, like he could make it true through sheer force of will. Olivia managed to turn her head slightly to look up at him. "My sister. I was going to my sister. She is sick." "Where does she live?" "Clayton Homestead, north of Muskogee." He was quiet for a moment, and she could see him calculating distances and danger. "That is still 3 miles from here, and this storm is not letting up. We get you warm and safe first, then we will figure out how to get word to your sister." "What is your name?" "Olivia. Olivia Ramsey." "Graham Carson. Hold on tight, Olivia Ramsey, we are almost there." The line shack was barely more than 4 walls and a roof, but it had a pot-belly stove and a stock of firewood, and it was blessedly out of the wind. Graham kicked the door open and carried her inside, setting her down carefully on the single bunk before turning immediately to the stove. His hands were shaking as he worked to get a fire started, and Olivia realized it was not just from the cold. He had been terrified. "How long were you digging?" she asked, her voice still weak. "I do not know. 2 hours maybe, could have been 3. He glanced back at her, and she saw his hands properly for the first time. They were torn and bleeding, some of the cuts deep enough that they would need stitches. He had dug through ice and rock and frozen earth with his bare hands, and he had not stopped until he found her. "Your hands," she whispered. "You need to wrap them." He looked down at them as if seeing them for the first time, then shrugged. "They will keep. We need to get you warm first. Can you get out of those wet clothes?" Olivia felt heat rush to her face despite the cold. Graham seemed to realize what he had said and turned even redder. "I mean, I will turn around. I will face the wall. But those wet things will kill you as sure as the snow would have. There is a blanket on the bunk. Wrap yourself in that." He turned his back and stood there stiffly while Olivia struggled with numb fingers to undo the buttons of her coat. Everything was soaked through, and it took her several minutes to peel the layers away. Her dress, her petticoats, her stockings, all of it clung to her skin. She kept the thin cotton of her undergarments on for modesty's sake, then wrapped herself in the rough wool blanket. It scratched against her skin, but she had never felt anything so wonderful. "All right," she said quietly. Graham turned back around, keeping his eyes carefully on her face. The fire was crackling now, starting to throw heat into the small space. He pulled the single chair closer to the stove. "Sit here. Get warm. I am going to see if there are any supplies in this place." There were supplies, as it turned out. Lined shacks were maintained by the various ranches to give cowboys shelter during long cattle drives or bad weather. This one belonged to the Three Bars Ranch, Graham told her, and he had worked for them on and off over the years, so he knew most of the lined shack locations. There was coffee and some dried beef, a few cans of beans, a bottle of whiskey. There was also a small box of medical supplies, probably intended for injured cattle more than people, but it would do. Olivia watched him move around the tiny space, his movements economical and efficient despite his injured hands. He was tall, she noticed, probably a few inches over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscled build of a man who made his living through physical labor. He was probably close to her own age, maybe a year or two older. When he caught her watching him, she quickly looked away. "You should let me tend to your hands," she said. "I have some experience with wounds. My father used to get injuries at the mercantile all the time." Graham hesitated, then nodded. He brought the medical supplies and sat down on the floor in front of her chair. She had to unwrap the blanket partially to free her arms, and she was intensely aware of how little she was wearing, but he kept his eyes fixed on his own hands as he held them out to her. They were even worse than she had thought. The palms were raw and bleeding, several nails torn, fingers scraped down to the flesh in places. She could see bits of ice and dirt embedded in some of the wounds. She looked up at him, and there were tears in her eyes. "You did this for me. You did not even know me. I saw you go down. I could not leave you there." He said it simply, as if there had never been any other choice. Olivia bent her head over his hands and began to clean them as gently as she could. He never made a sound, never flinched, even when she had to dig out pieces of debris. She worked in silence, her own hands still clumsy with cold, but determined to do this one thing for the man who had saved her life. "Why were you up on that ridge?" she asked. "In this weather?" "I was heading back to the 3 Bars from town. I know I should have holed up somewhere and waited out the storm, but I figured I could make it if I was quick. Then I saw you on that path, saw your horse struggling. I was trying to get to you to warn you about the shelf, but I was too far away." His voice dropped. "I saw the whole thing give way. I saw you disappear. I have never been so scared in my life. But you did not run away. You dug me out. What else would I do?" She finished wrapping his hands in strips torn from one of the extra shirts she found in a chest. They were too big for his hands, really, and would make it hard for him to use his fingers, but they would keep the wounds clean. When she was done, he flexed them experimentally and nodded. "Thank you. It is nothing compared to what you did." The wind howled outside, rattling the walls of the little shack. Snow was piling up against the door. Graham stood and went to the single window, peering out into the white. "This is going to last through the night at least, maybe into tomorrow. We are stuck here for now." Olivia felt a flutter of nervousness. Stuck in a tiny cabin with a strange man, wearing nothing but her undergarments and a blanket. It was completely improper. If anyone found out, her reputation would be ruined. But then again, if Graham had not done exactly what he did, she would be dead right now. Propriety seemed like a small concern compared to that. What about my sister? She is expecting me. Is her husband there with her? Yes, Thomas is a good man. He will take care of her. Then she will be all right for now, and as soon as this storm breaks, we will get word to her." He came back to the stove and started making coffee. "You should eat something. When was the last time you ate?" Olivia tried to remember. She had been so worried about Margaret that she had skipped breakfast. "This morning, early. No wonder you look like you are going to fall over." He handed her a cup of steaming coffee and a piece of dried beef. "Eat. That is an order." She took the food gratefully, and they sat in companionable silence while she ate and the storm raged outside. The warmth of the fire was seeping into her bones, chasing away the terrible cold that had gripped her in the snow. She watched Graham over the rim of her coffee cup, studying his face in the firelight. He had a strong jaw, a straight nose that looked like it might have been broken once, and those startling blue eyes. There was a scar above his left eyebrow and another along his jaw. He looked like a man who had lived hard, but there was something kind in his expression, something gentle in the way he moved. "How long have you been in Oklahoma?" she asked. "About 5 years. I came out from Texas after my parents died." They had a small ranch down in the hill country, but it was mortgaged to the teeth. After they passed, the bank took it. I drifted for a while, working different ranches before I ended up at the 3 Bars. "I am sorry about your parents," he shrugged. "It was a long time ago. What about you?" "You do not sound like you are from around here." "Tennessee. We came west 4 years ago after my mother died. My father thought a fresh start would be good for us. He bought the Mercantile in Muskogee." "Ramsey's Mercantile. I have been there. Your father is the tall man with the gray beard." "That is him." Graham smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face. "He sold me these boots, swore they would last me 10 years. That was 3 years ago, and they are still holding up fine. He takes pride in selling quality goods." Olivia smiled back. "He will be beside himself with worry when I do not come home tonight. We will get word to him as soon as we can. I promise." The evening wore on, and they talked. Graham told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the cattle drives he had been on, and the places he had seen. Olivia told him about Tennessee, about the Mercantile, about her sister and her hopes that Margaret's baby would be born healthy in the spring. They talked about books they had read, places they wanted to go, dreams they had for the future. It was the easiest conversation Olivia had ever had, words flowing between them like they had known each other for years instead of hours. At some point, Olivia realized she was exhausted. The combination of warmth and food and the aftermath of terror was pulling her down into sleep. Graham noticed her eyelids drooping and stood up. "You need to rest. Take the bunk. I will sleep on the floor." "That is not fair. You are the one who saved my life. You should have the bed. And you are the one who nearly died today. You need proper rest more than I do." His tone left no room for argument. Olivia was too tired to fight him. She lay down on the narrow bunk, still wrapped in her blanket, and Graham covered her with his coat as well. The smell of him surrounded her, and she felt safe in a way she had not felt since before her mother died. "Graham," she whispered into the darkness. "Yes, thank you for everything. Go to sleep, Olivia." She drifted off to the sound of him moving around the cabin, adding wood to the fire, settling himself on the floor. Her last conscious thought was that she had never met anyone like Graham Carson, and she hoped this would not be the last time she saw him. When Olivia woke, pale gray light was filtering through the window and the storm had quieted. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, then remembered everything. The avalanche, the digging, Graham. She looked around and found him asleep on the floor near the stove, using his saddle as a pillow, his coat thrown over him as a blanket. Even in sleep, his face looked tired. She wondered if he had slept at all, or if he had spent the night keeping watch, making sure she was all right. She slipped out of the bunk as quietly as she could, keeping the blanket wrapped around her. Her clothes were hanging near the stove and she checked them. Still damp, but no longer soaked. She would be able to put them on soon. She added wood to the fire and started making coffee, trying to remember how she had seen Graham do it the night before. She must have made some noise because he stirred, then sat up quickly, his eyes going immediately to the bunk to check on her. When he saw her by the stove, he relaxed. "Good morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning. I am making coffee, or at least I am trying to." He stood and stretched, then came over to help her. Their hands touched as he reached for the pot, and Olivia felt a jolt of something electric run through her. Their eyes met, and she saw her own confusion reflected in his face. This was not normal. People did not feel this way after knowing someone for 12 hours. But there it was, undeniable and powerful, crackling between them like lightning. Graham cleared his throat and stepped back. "The storm has passed. We should be able to head out once you are dressed and we have had some breakfast." "Where will we go?" "Back to Muskogee. It is closer than the 3 bars and your father will be worried sick. We can send someone out to check on your sister from there." Olivia nodded. She took her clothes behind the blanket that Graham hung as a makeshift curtain and dressed as quickly as her still stiff fingers would allow. The fabric was cold and slightly clammy, but it was better than staying in her undergarments. When she emerged, Graham had breakfast ready, such as it was. Beans and coffee and more dried beef. They ate quickly, both of them anxious to get moving. Graham saddled his horse and helped Olivia up, then swung up behind her just like the day before. The world outside was transformed, buried under feet of fresh snow that sparkled in the weak morning sunlight. The temperature had dropped even further, and Olivia was grateful for Graham's warmth at her back. The ride to Muskogee took most of the morning. The snow made the going slow, and Graham had to pick their path carefully to avoid drifts that would swallow the horse up to his chest. They talked less than they had the night before, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But Olivia was hyper-aware of every point where their bodies touched, every brush of his arms against hers as he held the reins. When they finally saw the buildings of Muskogee rising out of the snow, Olivia felt a complicated mix of relief and disappointment. Relief that she was home safe, but disappointment that her time with Graham was ending. They rode down Main Street, and people stopped to stare. The few who were out clearing snow from their storefronts called out questions. Graham ignored them and headed straight for the Mercantile. The door flew open before they reached it, and her father came running out, his face a mask of fear and relief. "Olivia, thank God." He practically pulled her off the horse, wrapping her in a crushing embrace. "I thought you were dead. When you did not come home and the storm hit, I thought." His voice broke. "I am all right, Papa, I am all right." Her father held her at arm's length, looking her over, then seemed to notice Graham for the first time. "Who are you? What happened?" Graham dismounted and pulled off his hat respectfully. "Graham Carson, sir. I work for the 3 Bars Ranch. Your daughter was caught in a snow slide up on the North Ridge yesterday. I dug her out and took her to a lined shack to wait out the storm." "He saved my life, Papa," Olivia said quietly. "I would have died if not for him." Her father looked at Graham with new eyes, taking in the exhaustion on his face, the bandaged hands, the way he swayed slightly on his feet. "You dug her out? With your hands?" "I did not have a shovel, sir." Her father stepped forward and grasped Graham's shoulder. "Then you have my eternal gratitude, young man. Come inside, both of you. You look like you are about to fall over." The Mercantile was warm and bright, and her father immediately began fussing over both of them. He made Olivia sit by the stove and brought her hot soup and bread. He carefully unwrapped Graham's hands and rewrapped them with proper bandages after applying salve. He insisted that Graham sit down and eat and drink and rest. Other people started arriving as word spread that Olivia was back safe, and she had to tell the story over and over again. Each time she did, Graham became more uncomfortable with the attention, until finally he stood up and said he needed to be getting back to the ranch. "Wait," Olivia said. She stood and crossed to him. "Will I see you again?" He looked down at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I would like that, very much. Come to dinner tomorrow night, please. It is the least we can do after what you did." Graham glanced at her father, who nodded vigorously. "Yes, yes, you must come, I insist." "All right," Graham said softly. "Tomorrow night." He left, and Olivia watched through the window as he rode away. She already missed him, which was ridiculous. She barely knew him. But something had happened up in that line shack, something she did not quite understand but could not deny. Her father came to stand beside her. "He seems like a good man." "He is, Papa. You could do worse." Olivia felt her cheeks heat. "Papa, it is not like that." "Is it not?" Her father smiled. "I may be old, but I am not blind, daughter. I saw the way you looked at him. And the way he looked at you." Olivia did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But that night, as she lay in her own bed in the small apartment above the mercantile, she could not stop thinking about Graham. About his blue eyes and his gentle hands and the way he had dug through frozen earth to save her. About the way they had talked for hours, the words coming so easily. About the jolt of electricity when they touched. She had been practical her whole life, practical and sensible and careful. But Graham Carson made her want to be reckless. The next day seemed to drag on forever. Olivia helped her father in the store, restocking shelves and helping customers, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept glancing at the clock, counting the hours until evening. Her father sent her upstairs to rest in the afternoon, saying she had been through an ordeal and needed to recover her strength. She tried to sleep, but could not, so instead she found herself going through her limited wardrobe, trying to decide what to wear. She settled on a dark green dress that her mother had made for her years ago. It was a little old-fashioned now, but it was well made, and the color brought out the hints of gold in her brown hair. She pinned her hair up carefully, leaving a few tendrils loose to frame her face. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the girl staring back. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright. She looked happy. Graham arrived exactly on time, carrying a bouquet of winter greenery that he must have spent time gathering. He had cleaned up, his hair still damp from a bath, wearing what were clearly his best clothes. His hands were still bandaged, but he held the greenery carefully as he offered it to Olivia. "I know these are not proper flowers, but it is winter, and I thought—" "They are perfect," Olivia said, taking them. "Thank you. Dinner was wonderful." Her father had closed the store early and cooked a roast with potatoes and carrots, and they ate in the small kitchen behind the shop. The conversation flowed easily, her father asking Graham about his work and his plans for the future. Graham answered honestly, talking about how he hoped to save enough money to buy his own land someday, nothing big, just a small ranch where he could raise horses. "Horses?" her father asked. "I have always loved them more than cattle. Smarter animals, more personality. I think there is a good market for quality horses, especially as more people move west." "That is solid thinking," her father said approvingly. After dinner, Olivia walked Graham out. The night was cold and clear, stars brilliant overhead. They stood on the sidewalk outside the mercantile, neither wanting to say goodbye. "Thank you for coming," Olivia said. "Thank you for inviting me." Graham hesitated, then said, "I know this might seem too soon, but would you allow me to call on you? Properly, I mean." Olivia felt joy bubble up inside her. "I would like that very much. I do not have much to offer. I am just a ranch hand, but I am honest and I work hard and I—" He trailed off, looking at her with those intense blue eyes. "I have not been able to stop thinking about you. From the moment I pulled you out of that snow, you have been all I can think about." "I feel the same way," Olivia admitted. "I know it does not make sense. We barely know each other." "Sometimes you just know," Graham said. He reached out and tucked one of the loose tendrils of hair behind her ear, his bandaged fingers gentle. "I think I knew the moment I saw you." They stood there in the cold, looking at each other, and Olivia felt like she was standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. Then Graham leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet, and she knew she was falling. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Graham came to town whenever he could, which was not as often as either of them would have liked. Ranch work was demanding, especially in winter when the cattle needed constant care. But he made the journey at least once a week, sometimes more, and they spent every moment they could together. They went for walks when the weather allowed, bundled up against the cold. They sat in the mercantile by the stove and talked for hours. Olivia packed him lunches to take back to the ranch, and Graham brought her small gifts, things he made himself or found on the range. A smooth stone shaped like a heart, a bird's nest perfectly formed, a carving of a horse he had whittled during long nights in the bunkhouse. Her father approved wholeheartedly, which Olivia had expected. Graham was exactly the kind of man he wanted for his daughter, honest and hardworking and respectful. What surprised her was how quickly she fell completely and utterly in love. She had always thought love would be a slow, gradual thing, a gentle growing together. But this was a wildfire, consuming and absolute. Graham felt the same way. She could see it in his eyes every time he looked at her, could feel it in the way he touched her, always gentle, always careful. He told her one night that he had never expected to fall in love, had resigned himself to a solitary life. But then he had pulled her out of that snow, and everything changed. "It was like you were meant to be there," he said. "Like the whole universe arranged itself to bring us together." "That is a very romantic thought for a cowboy," Olivia teased. "Cowboys can be romantic," Graham protested. "We just do not usually advertise it." When spring finally came, melting the snow and turning the prairie green, Graham asked Olivia to marry him. He did it on a Sunday afternoon, down by the river where wildflowers were starting to bloom. He had been saving money, he told her, and he had found a piece of land he could afford. 50 acres about 10 miles from Muskogee, with good grass and a creek running through it. It was not much, but it was a start. If she would have him, he would build her a house there and they could start their life together. Olivia said yes without hesitation. Her father gave his blessing readily, and they set the wedding date for June. It gave them 2 months to prepare, which was not much time but felt like an eternity when every day apart from Graham was agony. The wedding took place in the small church in Muskogee on a bright June morning. Olivia wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully altered to fit her. Graham wore a new suit, dark and formal, but he looked uncomfortable in it. He looked much more himself once they were out of the church, and he could loosen the collar. The reception was held in the yard behind the mercantile, and it seemed like the whole town turned out. There was music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. Margaret was there with her husband Thomas and their new baby son, who had been born in April. She pulled Olivia aside at one point and hugged her tight. "I am so happy for you," Margaret said, "and I owe Graham my life. If he had not saved you that day, if you had died trying to bring me medicine." Her voice caught. "But I did not die, and you are well now, and so is little James. Everything worked out the way it was supposed to. Still, That man loves you something fierce. Anyone can see it." Olivia looked across the yard to where Graham was talking with some of the ranch hands from the 3 bars. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up and smiled, and she felt that now familiar jolt of electricity. "I love him the same way," Olivia said. They left the reception as the sun was setting, riding out to their new land in a wagon loaded with their belongings and wedding gifts. The house Graham had built was small, just 3 rooms, but it was solid and well made. He carried her over the threshold, and they spent their first night as husband and wife in the bed he had built with his own hands. The next few years were hard work, but happy. They built the ranch together, starting with a small herd of horses that Graham trained and sold. Olivia kept a garden and chickens, and she helped with the horses, learning to gentle them and work with them. They were partners in every sense of the word, building their life side by side. In the spring of 1887, Olivia gave birth to their first child, a son they named George. He had Graham's blue eyes and Olivia's dark hair, and they both fell instantly and completely in love with him. Graham was a natural father, patient and gentle, and Olivia often found him in the nursery at night, just watching George sleep. "I never thought I could be this happy," Graham told her one night as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over their land. George was asleep inside, and the horses were grazing peacefully in the pasture. "Sometimes I still dream about that day on the ridge, about seeing you disappear into the snow. In the dreams, I do not reach you in time. I wake up in a cold sweat, and I have to check that you are still here, still breathing." Olivia took his hand, the one that still bore scars from digging her out. "I am here. I am not going anywhere. I know. But I came so close to losing you before I even knew you. Another 5 minutes, another 10, and you would have been gone, and I would never have known what I was missing. But you did reach me in time. You saved me, Graham. You gave me my life back, and then you gave me this life, this beautiful life with you. I would not trade it for anything." They had 2 more children in the years that followed, a daughter named Clara in 1889 and another son named Henry in 1891. The ranch prospered, Graham's reputation as a horse trainer growing until people came from all over the territory to buy from him. They added onto the house, building more rooms, a bigger kitchen, a proper barn. Olivia's father grew older and eventually sold the mercantile, moving in with them for the last years of his life. He died peacefully in his sleep in 1895, surrounded by his family. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, next to a spot they were saving for Olivia's mother, whose body they had moved from Tennessee. Margaret and Thomas bought land nearby, and the 2 families remained close. The children grew up together, cousins and best friends. There were hard times, of course, droughts and diseases and the 1,000 small disasters that made up frontier life. But through it all, Graham and Olivia had each other. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Graham surprised Olivia by taking her back to the line shack where they had spent that first night together. It was still there, maintained by the 3 bars, though Graham had long since stopped working for them. They rode up on a warm June day, just the 2 of them, leaving the children with Margaret. The shack looked exactly the same, weathered but solid. They went inside, and Olivia was flooded with memories. The fear and cold of that terrible day, yes, but also the warmth and safety she had felt with Graham, the beginning of everything. "Do you remember what you said to me that night?" Graham asked. "When I told you to go to sleep, I said thank you. You did. And I thought to myself, this is the bravest woman I have ever met. She nearly died. She is stuck in a shack with a stranger, and all she can think about is saying thank you." He pulled her close. "I started falling in love with you right then, I think." before I even knew what your favorite color was, or what you like to read, or any of the million little things I have learned about you since. I loved you for your courage and your grace. I fell in love with you because you cared enough to dig, Olivia said. Because when every sensible person would have assumed I was dead and gone, you believed I was still alive, and you did not stop until you found me. You fought for me before you even knew me. How could I not love you for that? They made love in that tiny shack, gentle and sweet, and then they sat and talked just like they had that first night. They talked about their children and their dreams for the future. About George, who was showing an interest in law and books rather than ranching. About Clara, who could ride better than most men and wanted to work with the horses just like her father. About Henry, who was still too young to know what he wanted but who had his father's quiet strength. I want them to know the story, Graham said, about how we met. I want them to know that sometimes the worst moments of your life can lead to the best things, that tragedy and joy are sometimes two sides of the same coin. We will tell them, Olivia promised, when they are old enough to understand. They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, and Olivia felt a deep sense of peace. Her life had not turned out the way she expected. She had thought she would marry someone local and predictable, probably Daniel Morrison from the bank or someone like him. She would have run the mercantile with her father and lived a quiet, respectable life. Instead, she had been caught in an avalanche and pulled from the snow by a blue-eyed cowboy who dug until his hands were raw. She had built a life with him, a beautiful, messy, wonderful life full of love and children and hard work. It was better than anything she could have imagined. The years continued to pass, bringing their own mix of joy and sorrow. In 1898, George left for university in St. Louis, determined to become a lawyer. Clara took over more and more of the horse training, developing her own techniques and her own reputation. Henry discovered a talent for mechanics and was fascinated by the new automobiles that were starting to appear. Margaret lost Thomas to pneumonia in 1900, and she leaned heavily on Olivia during that dark time. Olivia understood grief, had felt it when her mother died, when her father died. She knew how to sit with someone in their pain, how to listen without trying to fix everything. Margaret eventually healed enough to smile again, to find joy in her children and grandchildren. In 1905, George came home from St. Louis with a wife, a smart, spirited woman named Catherine who was studying to be a teacher. They settled in Muskogee, and George opened a law practice. Clara married a rancher from the next county over, a good man who respected her skills and treated her as an equal partner. Henry got a job with an automobile company, traveling around installing and repairing the new machines. Graham and Olivia watched their children build their own lives and felt proud. They had given them strong foundations, taught them to work hard and love deeply and treat people with respect. Now they could watch them fly. In 1910, on a warm May afternoon, Graham and Olivia sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the horses graze. They were both in their late 40s now, their hair showing gray, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and hard years. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, still felt that electric connection. You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not been on that ridge that day? Olivia asked. If you had stayed in town or taken a different route? I try not to, Graham said. It is too terrible to think about. You would have died and I would have gone on living, never knowing that the other half of my soul was buried in the snow just a few miles away. The other half of your soul, Olivia repeated softly. That is exactly what you are. We were lucky, Graham said. So incredibly lucky. The odds of us meeting the way we did, of everything coming together exactly right. He shook his head. It should not have worked. I should have been too far away to see you. The snow should have been too deep. I should have given up. You should have run out of air. Any one of 100 things could have gone wrong, and we would never have had this life. But they did not go wrong. We got our miracle. We did. They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Grandchildren were coming for dinner, 3 from George, 2 from Clara, and 1 from Henry. The house would be full of noise and laughter, the table groaning under the weight of food. It would be chaotic and wonderful. I have been thinking, Graham said, about what comes next. We are not young anymore, Olivia. Our bodies are starting to wear out from all those years of hard work. Are you feeling all right? Olivia asked, concerned. I am fine, but I am 50 years old and you are 48. We need to start thinking about slowing down, maybe letting Clara and her husband take over more of the day-to-day operations. We have earned some rest. Rest sounds good, Olivia admitted. Her back ached most mornings now, and her hands were stiff from years of work. What would we do with all that free time? Travel, maybe. Visit George in St. Louis. Go to Tennessee and see the places you remember from childhood. Or we could just sit right here on this porch and watch the world go by. I do not need anything fancy. I just want to spend whatever time we have left together. That sounds perfect. Over the next few years, they did exactly that. They gradually handed over the running of the ranch to Clara and her husband, though Graham still helped with training the horses when his hands would allow it. They took trips, short ones at first, then longer. They went to Tennessee and Olivia showed Graham the house where she grew up, the church where her parents were married. They went to Texas and saw what remained of Graham's family ranch, now absorbed into a larger operation. They visited all their children regularly, delighting in their grandchildren and watching them grow. They attended George's cases when they were in town, proud to see him arguing eloquently in court. They watched Clara win prizes at horse shows, her skills as a trainer recognized throughout the region. They rode in Henry's automobile, marveling at how much the world was changing. But always they came back to the ranch, to the house Graham built, to the land they had worked side by side for decades. It was home in the deepest sense of the word, the place where they belonged. On a cold January day in 1915, 30 years after that fateful avalanche, Olivia woke to find snow falling. Heavy, thick flakes that reminded her of that long-ago storm. She got up carefully, trying not to wake Graham, and went to the window to watch it come down. Graham stirred anyway, as he always did when she left the bed. "What are you looking at? The snow. It is really coming down." He got up and came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They stood together, watching the white world outside. Olivia leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. 30 years, she said softly. 30 years since the day we met. The best 30 years of my life, Graham said. He kissed the top of her head. Do you remember being afraid? Being trapped in the dark and the cold. I remember thinking I was going to die. That I would never fall in love, never have children, never really live. And then I heard you digging, heard your voice telling me to hold on, and I knew I was going to be all right. I was so scared, Graham admitted. My hands were bleeding and frozen, and I could not feel my fingers anymore, but I kept digging because I could not stand the thought of you dying down there. I had seen you for maybe 30 seconds before the slide hit, but somehow I already knew you were important. Does that sound crazy? No, it sounds like fate. They stood there for a long time, watching the snow, remembering. All the years, all the moments, all the joys and sorrows that had made up their life together. The children they had raised, the ranch they had built, the love they had nurtured and protected and allowed to grow. If I could go back, Olivia said, If I could change that day, stop the avalanche from happening, I do not think I would, because that terrible, frightening experience brought us together. It gave us this life. I would not change it either, Graham agreed. Not for anything in the world. The snow continued to fall, blanketing their land in white, just as it had that day 30 years ago. But now they were safe and warm inside their home, surrounded by the life they had built together. They had come so far from that tiny lined shack, from the scared young woman and the determined young man who had refused to give up on her. Their children came to visit that evening, worried about them in the storm. George and Catherine drove out from Muskogee. Clara and her husband came from their ranch next door, and Henry made it just before the roads became impassable. They all gathered in the big kitchen, and someone asked how Graham and Olivia met. So they told the story, as they had told it many times before, about the avalanche and the desperate hours of digging and the night in the lined shack, about falling in love fast and hard and true. The grandchildren listened wide-eyed, and George's oldest, a boy of 12 named William, asked the question they all wanted to ask. "Were you scared, grandmother, when you were trapped?" "I was terrified," Olivia said honestly, "but your grandfather saved me. He dug through snow and ice with his bare hands until he found me. He never gave up, even when it would have been easier to." "Why?" William asked, looking at Graham. "Why did you not give up?" Graham thought about it, looking at Olivia across the table. "Because some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible, especially then. Your grandmother was worth every moment of pain, every frozen finger, every doubt. She was worth everything." "She still is," Clara added, smiling at her parents. The evening wore on, full of warmth and laughter and love. Eventually, the children left to get home before the roads got worse, and Graham and Olivia were alone again. They cleaned up the kitchen together, working in the comfortable rhythm of 30 years of marriage. "That was a good day," Graham said as they got ready for bed. "Having everyone here telling the story again." "It was," Olivia agreed. She looked at him, at the gray in his hair and the lines on his face and the hands that still bore faint scars from that long-ago digging. He was still the most handsome man she had ever seen. "We have had a good life, Graham." "The best," he agreed. He took her hands in his. "I love you, Olivia Carson. I have loved you since the moment I pulled you from that snow, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond. I love you too. Always." They made love that night, tender and slow, a reaffirmation of 30 years of love and partnership. Afterward, they lay tangled together, listening to the wind outside and the crackle of the fire in the stove. "Do you think it is strange," Olivia asked, "that the worst day of my life was also the best? That I am grateful for an avalanche? I think life is full of contradictions like that. The worst things and the best things are often tangled up together, impossible to separate. We got lucky, that is all. We found each other in the chaos. We made our own luck," Olivia corrected. "You made the choice to dig, I made the choice to hold on. We both made the choice to fall in love. Those were not accidents." "No," Graham agreed. "They were not." The years continued to pass, though more slowly now. Graham and Olivia grew older, their bodies gradually failing them, but their love remained as strong as ever. They held hands as they walked slowly around the ranch. They sat together on the porch for hours, content in each other's company. They read to each other in the evenings, books they had loved and new ones their children brought them. In 1920, when Olivia was 58 and Graham was 60, they threw a party for their 35th wedding anniversary. The ranch was full of children and grandchildren and now great-grandchildren, 3 tiny babies who were passed around and admired. Friends came from all over, some traveling for days to be there. At one point, Graham stood up and quieted the crowd. He was not much for speeches. Everyone knew that, but he had something he wanted to say. 35 years ago, I married the most extraordinary woman I have ever known. She was brave and kind and beautiful, and somehow she agreed to spend her life with a rough cowboy who did not have much to offer except his love. It is the best decision I ever made, asking her to marry me. And every day since, I have thanked God that she said yes. He looked at Olivia, and his voice got thick with emotion. You are my miracle, Olivia. You are the gift I did not know I was waiting for. Thank you for 35 years of happiness. Thank you for our children and grandchildren. Thank you for building this life with me. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. There was not a dry eye in the place. Olivia stood and went to him, and they kissed while everyone cheered. It was a perfect moment, a crystallization of their love story. As the years went on, health problems began to creep in. Graham developed arthritis in his hands, the same hands he had torn up digging Olivia from the snow. The doctors said it was probably made worse by that old injury, the cold and the trauma. He bore it without complaint, though Olivia knew he was in constant pain. She did what she could to help, learning to massage his hands and making poultices that sometimes eased the aching. Olivia's own health remained fairly good until 1925, when she had a bad fall and broke her hip. She was 63, and the recovery was slow and difficult. Graham barely left her side during those long weeks, helping her with everything, patient and gentle. When she finally healed enough to walk again, it was with a cane, and she would never move quite the same way. But they adapted as they always had. They moved their bedroom to the first floor, since stairs were difficult now. Clara and her husband moved into the house to help care for them, though both Graham and Olivia insisted they did not need caretaking. They were just slowing down, that was all. In 1928, on a bright spring morning, Graham woke before dawn with a strange feeling in his chest. He lay still for a moment, testing it, trying to decide if it was serious. The pain spread, growing sharper, and he knew. He turned to Olivia, who was still sleeping beside him, and gently touched her face. Olivia, wake up, sweetheart. She stirred, opened her eyes. What is wrong? I think you need to call for the doctor and get the children. She saw it in his face then, the knowledge of what was happening. No, Graham, not yet. We have more time. We have had 43 years, he said softly. That is more than most people get. That is a miracle in itself. Clara heard the commotion and came running. She took one look at her father and sent her husband for the doctor, while she helped her mother into a chair beside the bed. Graham was struggling to breathe now, the pain intensifying. But he kept his eyes on Olivia, trying to memorize every detail of her face. I am not ready, Olivia said, tears streaming down her face. I am not ready to lose you. You will never lose me. I will always be with you. He reached for her hand with his ruined, arthritic one, and she gripped it tight. You made my life worth living, Olivia. Every moment with you was a gift. You saved me, she sobbed. You pulled me from the snow and you gave me a whole life. How do I go on without you? The same way you held on in the dark. You keep breathing. You keep living. You do it for our children and grandchildren. You do it because life is precious and beautiful and worth fighting for. He coughed, grimaced. Promise me. I promise. George arrived, then Henry, then all the grandchildren who lived close enough. They crowded into the room surrounding the bed. The doctor came and examined Graham, then stepped back with a sad shake of his head. There was nothing he could do. It was Graham's heart, worn out from 68 years of hard living and hard loving. Graham looked at each of his children in turn, telling them he loved them, that he was proud of them. He looked at his grandchildren and great-grandchildren and smiled. Take care of your grandmother, he told them. She is the strongest person I know, but she is going to need you." Then he looked back at Olivia, and it was just the two of them again, young and in love, standing in the snow. "I would do it again," he whispered. "Every moment of pain, every hard year, every struggle. I would do it all again for one more day with you." "I love you," Olivia said. "I will always love you, I know. I have always known." He closed his eyes, and with Olivia's hand in his, Graham Carson took his last breath. The grief was overwhelming. Olivia felt like she had been buried in an avalanche again, drowning in pain and loss. But she remembered her promise, remembered that Graham had told her to keep living. So she did. They buried him on the hill next to her parents, overlooking the ranch he had built. The funeral was huge, people coming from all over to pay their respects to a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Olivia stood dry-eyed through the service, her children on either side of her, and said goodbye to the love of her life. The months that followed were the hardest of her life, harder even than being trapped in the snow. She missed Graham constantly, achingly. She missed his voice and his laugh and the way he held her at night. She missed the small routines of their life together, the morning coffee and the evening talks and the 1,000 tiny moments that made up a marriage. But she kept her promise. She kept living. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, telling them stories about Graham, keeping his memory alive. She worked in the garden when her hip allowed it. She read and wrote letters and watched the world change around her. In 1930, on what would have been their 45th wedding anniversary, Olivia went to Graham's grave. She sat beside it for a long time, talking to him, telling him everything that had happened in the 2 years since he died. About George's success as a lawyer, about Clara's horses winning awards across the state, about Henry's work with a new airplane company, about the great-grandchildren he had never met, beautiful babies who carried his genes and his legacy. "I miss you every day," she told the headstone. "But I am all right. Our children are all right. We are living the life you and I built together, and it is beautiful. You would be so proud." She sat there until the sun started to set, painting the sky in the colors Graham had always loved. Then she stood, using her cane, and walked slowly back to the house. She had made a good life with Graham Carson, a beautiful life full of love and meaning. And though he was gone, that life continued. Their story continued in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built, in the love they had shared. Olivia lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1938 at the age of 76. They buried her next to Graham, their headstones side by side, just as they had been in life. The inscription on hers read, "Beloved wife and mother," but Clara added one more line, something her father had said once: "She was worth everything." The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations. The story of Graham and Olivia became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and holidays. The lined shack where they spent their first night together eventually fell into disrepair, but Clara's grandson rebuilt it in the 1960s, placing a plaque inside that told the story of the cowboy who dug with his bare hands and the woman who held on in the darkness. Their love story lived on, a testament to courage and determination, and the power of two people who found each other against all odds. They had been given a miracle that day in the snow, and they had honored it by building a life of love and purpose. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could leave behind.